In 1961, Jane Jacobs published The Death and Life of Great American Cities. This book, she wrote, is an attack on current city planning and rebuilding. And so Jane Jacobs began an enduring conversation with readers worldwide about cities and how we design and live in them. For more than 4 decades, this conversation has ranged from urban design to economics, from education to politics, always passionate, personal, articulate, and deeply thought. Her mind, wrote biographer Alice Sparberg-Alexiou, knows no restraints and is uninhibited by dogma or theories, resulting in ideas that meander all over the landscape, touching on so many subjects that it is impossible to trace the progression of her thinking. Yet there has been clarity of purpose, how to make order out of urban chaos. With her unshakable self-confidence, penetrating mind, persuasive words, and great powers of connectivity, Jane Jacobs continues to influence the way private citizens and public officials think about, plan, shape, and rebuild our communities.
Some people think that it's a misfortune to have large cities, but they only need to look at the world's demography and see that countries or regions with 80%, 75%, so on, of the people living in rural or other scattered communities are the poorest in the whole world. And not poor in any romantic way, poor in a grubbing, futile kind of way. And nobody knows, or at least demonstrates that they know, how to correct this, other than with successful creative cities. The good news, to my mind, and why this is basically an optimistic book that I've written, apart from the fact that maybe I kid myself because I'm temperamentally an optimist. But I see reason, lots of good reason for optimism. The major one is that it's not hard to do things right. It's much harder to do things wrong.
To generate exuberant diversity in a city's streets and districts, 4 conditions are indispensable. The district must serve more than one primary function, preferably more than 2. Most blocks must be short. The district must mingle buildings that vary in age and condition. There must be a sufficiently dense concentration of people. Talk a little bit about, as a planner, the role of individuals in planning cities.
Jane wasn't an institutionalist, right? You know, she wasn't about building big bureaucratic structures to manage landscapes or communities or development. Jane was about, in many ways, her work was about creating an environment within which individuals and communities themselves could express themselves. It was about enabling that kind of expression, not kind of trying to fit it into some kind of preordained, kind of structure.
A city that is successful has to be forever young and forever creative. And if getting mature means developing an establishment that now rules everything, and things do not change, and young organizations do not supplant the dying ones, because there will always be dying ones. this is not something to be looked forward to. This is one of the troubles with what I call the vision thing. The vision thing is an idea that somewhere or other in the future is a golden age that we should be working toward. And when we get it, boy, won't that be great.
Effective neighborhood planning should aim to foster lively and interesting streets, to make the fabric of these streets as continuous a network as possible throughout the neighborhood, use parks, squares, and public buildings as part of the street fabric, and emphasize the functional identity of districts and neighborhoods.
Her writing, spawned a generation of thought beyond the dogma of the time, beyond what is frequently, too broadly called modernism. But dogma is, awfully important to many planners and to many architects, and there's, of course, a history of dogmas. And a history of overturning them as well, but usually by other dogmas. And I think that her legacy to writers is to look at the facts on the ground, to really pay attention to the facts on the ground, and look at them free of dogma.
Nobody can be a prophet. The future reveals itself only by already having happened. And it's full of surprises, some good, some bad. And nobody except charlatans can be prophets. And everybody can be as aware as possible of what is actually happening. Now, to give a few little indications of what is actually happening that people don't seem to notice much. On the one side are authorities that want to make cities bigger, often against the will of the people who live in them. They want to amalgamate everything. They think it will be easier to control. They're deluded in that because it's also easier for citizens to organize and to become enraged at losing so much local control, as amalgamation always brings.
She would have, I suspect, chuckled on many of the notions that were presented in the last 10-15 years about the fact that the city is dead because people now are going to retreat to their forests and work on their computers. And I think it's clear to us now that the longer the time that we spend watching our computer screen, the more hungry we are for running out of the office at 12 o'clock to have lunch with somebody so that we can talk to a human being. I think we have underestimated the nature of ourselves. And so I think Jane Jacobs will remind us about those issues, that no matter how technologically changed our society, we are still social animals that live very heavily on social interactions.
The way to get at what goes on in the seemingly mysterious and perverse behavior of cities is, I think, to look closely and with as little previous expectation as is possible at the most ordinary scenes and events, and attempt to see what they mean and whether any threads of principle emerge among them. One ubiquitous principle is the need of cities for a most intricate and close-grained diversity of uses that give each other constant mutual support, both economically and socially. The science of city planning and the art of city design must become the science and art of catalyzing and nourishing these close-grained working relationships.
You know, what we're doing with planning and with citizen participation is getting as many people as possible to help us understand what they see. And in doing so, what they're doing is helping us create perhaps a more robust, more resilient picture of what we may really be dealing with. You know, Jane, in the work that she did, had a lot to do with really kind of bringing forth the notion of human scale, bringing human scale back into the 20th century. That, you know, the reason why cities were good places was because of the way in which things happened at a scale at which people could be the major part. And so I think her work fundamentally reminds us that it is all about scale. And that scale is the human being. That's really what cities are all about.
Well, I think the main things that government can do is to remove barriers to creative people doing their experiments, and because all creative work includes a lot of trial and error and experiment, and it leads a lot of support. If you look in any book, there's a division somewhere in the front or the back called acknowledgments. And these acknowledgments are getting longer and longer and longer. And since I've been writing a long time and having acknowledgments, I'm guilty of this. But it's part of the complexity and constantly growing complexity of our culture and our needs. We do need information from more kinds of people and achievements from more kinds of people to understand our own times and make use of them.
Talk a little bit about Richard, Florida, and how you see Jane's ideas fitting in with, or not, with Florida. Or I guess you could say how Florida's ideas would fit in with Jane.
It had not appeared, no references to Jane Jacobs had appeared in the Rise of the Creative class. That's the only book I'd read by him. And so I asked him, you know, I said, well, what about the economy of cities? Is that figured into your thinking at all? He goes, oh, well, God, that's the Rosetta Stone of my thinking. And he seemed sort of surprised that, that this was coming up in the conversation, and he, started riffing on it. And I think Florida just really took that and said, well, let's look at what's out there now and what are the forces that are a hindrance to this, and recognize that patents, things like this. I mean, that's quintessential, Jane Jacobs. I mean, it's right out of the playbook.
Cities need old buildings so badly it is probably impossible for vigorous streets and districts to grow without them. By old buildings, I mean not museum piece old buildings, not old buildings in an excellent and expensive state of rehabilitation, but a lot of plain, ordinary, low-value old buildings, including some run-down buildings. The economic value of old buildings is irreplaceable. It is created by time. This economic requisite for diversity is a requisite that vital city neighborhoods can only inherit and then sustain over the years.
As you go around, as you look to what cities mean, as you look to the revival of the city, especially in the last 20 years, watching neighborhoods revive, and you begin to understand the wisdom of considering the city as a living entity and not as a static entity. And I think, I don't think her influence on us has been sudden. I think her influence has been gradual. And I believe that that's the best influence, because a sudden change suddenly doesn't last, usually doesn't last long. I think her influence filtered down to the planners slowly but surely.
Billions of dollars have been spent on limited access highways that are supposed to serve our cities, and much time has elapsed, and yet every road that is built makes the problem worse, not better. Something is wrong with that. And what's needed is rethinking. And when you find something as important as the major transportation, repeating and repeating mistakes and not really understanding why it's going wrong, which is evidence of neglect of feedback too. The fact that the traffic systems keep getting worse that's feedback that is being ignored and certainly not understood.
City designers should return to a strategy ennobling both to art and to life, a strategy of illuminating and clarifying life and helping to explain to us its meanings and order. In this case, helping to illuminate, clarify, and explain the order of cities.
The last thing I think about Jane that I think is so important is she was a woman of high principle, and in her work and in the way in which she talked about things and the way in which she lived her life, those principles were evident, and it's just simply inspirational to see principles guiding a life and a work as evidently as they do with Jane Jacobs.